Okay, well, deacon is a tough act to follow, but I'll do my best. The first chapter of the third edition of the Fundamental Ideas 3 opens by giving a history. That's chapter 1 is basically about, is the history of the movement. It starts in Spain, of course, a country this time in the beginning that was torn apart politically and spiritually by a civil war, and a story of maturation process that binds us where we are today. What they went through and how Cursillo was developed really binds us together today. Most, if not all, the movements are the result of a quest to find change or develop a path from which one could improve and change their status quo. In the very least, in the eyes and the mind of those looking beyond their present environment. Reviewing the first chapter of Fundamental Ideas, it is important to realize that none of what was initiated in Majorca, Spain in the 40s, or what we have today would be possible without the intersection of the Holy Spirit. It is important to note that this is the third edition of the Fundamental Ideas. There were 2 previous books. Why is that important? Because change on some levels is unavoidable when one is involved with a changing world that has influence on a movement. Change also comes through growth. Not as important to remain as much as possible to the original methods, and in this movement, the established charisms. By doing this, we continue with a standard that meets the intended objectives. The first chapter opens by giving us a review of the history, the background story, if you will, of how the movement as we know it today, the Harrisburg-Cursillo movement, came to be. We start in Spain in the 1940s. This is a period, as I said, after a civil war of 1936 to 1939. What followed the war was a time of uncertainty and despair. The country was trying to find itself and establish a sense of normalcy. The Catholic Church was also struggling to recover from a period of persecution. There was an emphasis on Catholicism, but it was more a social Catholicism. Much what many would say, like today, that we are seeing in today's world. Striving to establish Catholic faith that aligned more with the traditional and theological aspects of the Catholic Church was a challenge. One organization that was present before the Civil War was known as Catholic Action. Catholic Action at this time was already established in Spain. Unique to Catholic Action was a structure that allowed for different age levels of participation. One of these levels was directed to involve youth. I'm not sure of the age requirements to be a member of the youth movement of Catholic Action, but it was with this youth movement that set the cornerstone, really, for our movement today. Before the war broke out, youth were in the process of planning a pilgrimage of the significant challenges, a pilgrimage to the shrine of St. James, now known as the El Camino, the Way of the Cross. Why is the third edition of Fundamentals needed? Why is it necessary for us to know our history? Some would say to recognize, maintain, and update our identity, and to remember the past with gratitude. Again, we must remember and realize that none of this would be possible without the intervention of the Holy Spirit. The past should not only be known as a series of dates and people only, but as an explanation of ideas, pastoral gifts, which gave birth to the Cursillo movement in a way that encourages interest in the life of the movement, its essence, its mentality. As I mentioned, the situation in Spain, the Cursillo movement was born specifically on the island of Majorca in the 1940s. Spain was going through a very tough post-Civil War time. The Civil War lasted those 3 years that I mentioned, and society was being rebuilt in an atmosphere of that change and insecurity. The post-war period began a restoration project for the church in Spain, in which Roman Catholicism was the official faith. What existed, however, was social Christianity, which lacked practically anything Catholic. That was the background in which Catholic Action stepped forward to promote the authenticity and involvement of the laity in the life of the church, especially the youth of that movement. The Spanish Catholic Action Youth, referred to as JACA, and I don't know how they get JACE out of Spanish Catholic Youth. But anyway, after the war, resumed a project that was conceived prior to the Civil War, that large pilgrimage I talked about to the shrine of St. James, and that was held in 1948. The beginning of Cruceo as we know it today quite literally finds its roots in that youth movement. There was a very lively and active diocesan council of the Youth of Catholic Action. There was also a Spanish national arm of Catholic Action. We, to an extent, have instituted some of the same structure. The first Cruceo was received and shared by a group of people. That group included but was not limited to Eduardo Benin, a layperson with preeminent leadership roles, some priests like Monsignor Sabatina Gea, and then Bishop of Majorca, Monsignor Juan Hervas. Between the years 1944 to 1949, intense study, reflection, and experimentation was carried out by these individuals. With the grace of the Holy Spirit, this work gave origin to the Cursiestas in Christianity, something new and different, in focus, with purpose and meaning. A new movement was taking shape, consisted of the following: a group of people that shared a mentality, a purpose to Christianity, an effective method to achieve the intended purpose, bring people to Christ, and a minimum organization and structure. A key point was the configuring of the mentality, the foundation stone which gave the movement shape. A perception of reality, have to know one's environment. A conclusion that a new evangelization activity was needed. A burning conviction that strong faith comes from transformed people. And for a certainty that the world is the place for salvation. The conviction that Christianity was the answer for problems of man and the world, that it was possible for anyone, even those who lived on the margins, to make their life Christian and become apostles, which would transform the environment. A mentality that established a new form of evangelization. A mentality that starts from the actual reality of people, where they are. A mentality that enables people to live what is fundamental to being Christian. And a mentality that moves them to become apostles in their environments. The movement began in the early 40s, became a reality in the Diocese of Majorca, was consolidated in the subsequent years of 1949 to 1954. As more Cruceos were held, the benefits of the results were clear. It was proved that the movement could be a universal solution to the task of evangelization. At this time, some basic structures were created: school leaders, group reunions, ultreas, and diocesan secretariats. Expansion of the Cruceo movement. From Majorca, the movement spread to include mainland Spain in 1953. Because of personal initiatives and the activities of the National Council, the movement spread across Spain. It sounds to me that Catholic Action, we have already discussed, played a role in the early growth of Cruceo movement as we know it today, because of their interaction with those that were forming the Cruceo that we know today. The transfer of Monsignor Juan Hervas to the mainland and the publication of the pastoral letter Cruceos and Christianity in 1957 stand as the defining moments for the acceptance of the Cursillo movement and its national and international expansion. And then from Spain to the Americas, people, both laity and priests, who experienced the benefits of the movement brought it to Latin America countries. Many of these folks had experienced the Cursillo, saw the benefits, got moved, transferred, moved on to other places, and continued, though they were so impacted, they continued to speak about Cursillo and wanted to get it started in the area that they finally settled in. People, both laity and priests, who experienced the benefits of the movement brought it to Latin American countries. The first country to receive Cursillo movement was Colombia through Catholic Action. There also were the first Cursillos for women held in 1953. The first Cursillo in the US was held in 1957, and from there spread to other English-speaking countries. From Spain and from other different countries, it is introduced into Western Europe. In Asia and Oceania, a similar process occurs during those years. And then from Austria introduced to the countries of Eastern Europe and to a smaller extent to some countries in Africa. Now Cursillo has become a universal movement. At this point, it becomes apparent formal structure is needed. The creation of diocesan secretariats, they are the first and most necessary organizational structure. It becomes apparent that basic organizational and ecclesiastical support was necessary to develop the movement. The movement is so based on interaction with churches, teachers, and theories and theological aspects of the church that it just made sense that the bishops and the diocese that Cursillo was being started in needed to have a hand and a say in what was going on. I believe that's probably one reason why today Cursillo needs to do a yearly report to the bishop to keep him abreast of what is going on. National secretariats were born from the need to cooperate and unify the life of the Cursillo movement in a particular country. It seemed to me like national secretariats were needed to develop some type of a structure because this Cursillo movement was expanding so rapidly that it was hard to gauge if Cursillo A was exactly like Cursillo B, like Cursillo D, and on down the lines. Because if you look at the dates, this really expanded and grew at such an incredible rate. It's unbelievable. Then in 1962, Venezuela, Spain, Portugal, Brazil formed their national secretariats. So you see what's happening here, rapid growth. As in the 60s, increasingly as national secretariats came online, it became apparent that these national secretariats needed to communicate and interact to keep the movement consistent. So international meetings and encounters began to develop and take place. The formation of an international group was first discussed at the first Latin American encounter held in Bogota, Colombia in 1968, and became a reality at the second Latin American encounter in 1970 in Texcala, Mexico, when the Latin American Office of Cursillo and Christianity, OLCC, was established. In 1972, as part of the World Encounter, the European Working Group, GET, was created and held its first meeting in Majorca later that year. In 1973, countries in North America, Europe, Asia, and Oceania raised a group, IELG. Rapid growth. By 1983, the countries of Asia and Oceania began moving to form their own group because of the size that they and the regions that they were incorporating. They formed the Asian Pacific Group, the APG, at a meeting in Guam in 1990. When English-speaking countries of Europe joined GET in 1977, the North American Caribbean Group was formed, of which we are under, NACG. International encounters and world encounters were soon held. The first world Ultrea was held in Rome in 1966 with Pope Paul VI present. The second world encounter was held in Mexico in 1970 and the third in Majorca in 1972, where it was agreed to produce the fundamental ideas of the Cursillo movement. This was to identify what characteristics the movement worldwide should have. World Body of Cursillo in Christianity, OMCC. In 1980, the international groups decided to establish a world body of the Cursillo movement, OMCC. Subsequent world encounters were celebrated under the coordination of OMCC. Subsequently, world encounters were celebrated under the coordination of OMCC. And the fourth world encounter was held in Caracas, Venezuela in 1988, where it was agreed to publish a second edition of Fundamental Ideas. And at the sixth world encounter, the decision was made to publish the third edition of Fundamental Ideas. This was finally redacted and approved in 2014, and that is actually what we're using this talk out of. Canonical recognition. One of the activities of OMC is to represent the movement worldwide, especially at significant ecclesiastical gatherings. In 1989, the OMCC sought the admission of the Cursillo movement to the Conference of International Catholic Organizations. Such requests made clear that the canonical recognition by the Holy See of the Cursillo movement was necessary and needed to be acted upon. We had determined that it's important to have the diocese involved because of how it interacts with the teachings of the church. It was even more so important to have the Vatican in charge or involved, so that we could be recognized as a world organization that follows the teachings of the church. Cursillo became a profound positive influence on the flock. Needed to be canonically sound, theologically sound. Currently, the Cursillo movement does not have the explicit canonical recognition. Currently, the Cursillo movement has the canonical recognition from the Holy See. OMCC began a process by submitting the statutes of the OMCC to the Pontifical Council for Laity, which has changed now. It's called something different, seeking canonical recognition of OMCC as the coordinating body of the Cursillo movement worldwide. It is now called the Dicastery for Faith and Family Life. The process took several years, and finally in 2014, the Council for Laity decreed the canonical recognition of OMCC as a structure of coordination, promotion, dissemination of the experiences of the Cursillo and Christianity with private judicial personalities and approving the statutes of the above-mentioned body. In September 2014, Pontifical Council confirmed the definite approval of the statutes of OMCC. So in summation, I'd just like to mention that reading over this, and I haven't read it over for some time, but reading over it, I realized that this happened at such a rapid pace. It's just almost unfathomable how quickly this mushroomed into such a huge organization that it is now. And also during those times that there was obviously changes that had to be made. One, because of growth. I mean, when you set a structure of a movement, you know, I'm sure you don't anticipate it growing at the rate it did. And with growth, a lot of times there becomes splintering or separation or fracturing, because it's growing at such a rapid pace that different ideas are going different ways. So to me, it's a bit amazing that it has stayed together as well as it has, especially, and fortunately, it was noticed quite early that there was a structure that was needed to sort of maintain the continuity of what the movement was all about. So yeah, very, very informative for me, very enlightening that I had forgotten some of the stuff. So I hope that gives you a little bit better understanding of where we came from and who we are as a Cursillo movement. De Colores.